If you're cold DMing other lo-fi producers trying to land a collaboration, that's totally normal. I actually recommend it, but I also recommend that you start the conversation with at least one and ideally a few samples in hand that you think will be a good fit for the person you're hoping to collaborate with. 9 times out of 10, if someone sends me a dope sample, it doesn't matter how busy I am or how stacked up my plate is. If it's a dope sample, I want to work with them. I want to make good music with cool people, and your best shot to land a collaboration with someone that's relatively busy is to just send them a dope sample. So today I want to talk about 3 solid rules of thumb to live by as far as crafting samples for collaborations go that I think will help you get a little bit closer to get that kind of right feel for the sample on that first try so you can land more collaborations. So to do this, I'm going to be talking about the sample that I made for the beat battle that's going on right now on our Discord server. There's still a little over a week to join, so hop in there if you guys are interested in flipping this one and collaborating with me. A little more on that later. We're just going to get it a full playthrough, and then I'm going to go through piece by piece and give you the 3 rules that I think are going to be helpful as you guys try to make your own samples for collabs. And sorry again about my voice, I'm still getting over this thing. So altogether, it's just over a minute long, 60 BPM. It's nothing too crazy, nothing too complicated, but I do feel like it really nails these 3 rules I'm about to go over. So let's get into rule number 1. When you're making a sample specifically for collaboration, you want to be sure that it's establishing a very clear direction. So you don't want there to be any ambiguity in what vibe you're going for, right? Is this going to be like a jazzy boom bap beat? Is this going to be kind of like a more sleepy, mellow, ambient-ish like this one here? Don't focus too hard on leaving too much space and then leave this kind of not well developed idea as the sample that you send over. So in this loop, I've got 7 layers that kind of come in throughout the track, and I'll talk a little bit more about the arrangement that I chose that all sort of mesh together into this sort of sleepy, ambient, relaxing space. There's obviously no drums. There's only kind of like a main melody and a minor counter melody thing happening here, but they're all coming together to paint a very clear direction, which is this nice kind of like relaxing, dreamy, sleepy, ambient direction. So I could bring this loop to anybody that I know is in this lane, and I feel like there's a pretty good chance they'd be interested in hopping on. So now let's look a little bit at what the arrangement of this loop is up to before we get into tip number 2. So it's really, like I said, very simple. We've got a 3-note triad that's really actually just a 2-note, a root, a fifth, and an octave. That's just kind of striking the chord with a couple of transition notes here. You hear that walk up in the bass note. This is functioning as the left hand of the first piano melody. And then we've got a new melody that comes in, completing the triad of the chords, and they're just kind of chiming with the downbeat and then hitting an extra note or an extra 2 notes as transition notes and just kind of complementing the motion of that left hand. So those 2 piano parts end up coming together like this. So that loops into itself really nicely. You could easily chop this out and repeat it a bunch of times without too much work. And I've intentionally separated the melody layer from the left hand in this case so that in my mind and the clear direction I was establishing, you could have just the left hand introduced in an intro or at a bridge section and then have that melody be there for more full, kind of more energetic parts. So then on top of that, in this first section, we've got a drone that just continues the entire track. So we've got a C sharp, which happens to be a common tone with all of the chords that I chose in this, which is an F sharp major. So that's just on the ethereal piano from Labs. And that's just ringing out kind of the whole time. I did some EQing, brought all the lows out, make sure there was nothing fighting with what would eventually be a bass part. Brought some of the highs back in to make sure it kind of sparkled. I've got a volume automation to get it going up and down in the mix, kind of along this LFO, and then fresh air kind of pulling even more of those highs out. And then the only other MIDI melodic element is this arpeggio. So this is doing just a 2-note arpeggio, kind of following the I think it's usually the root and the fifth. Oh no, so sorry. We've got that C sharp drone going the whole time, bouncing sometimes between the root, the fifth, or the third of the chords that the piano is playing. So everything fits really well, but it's just an added piece of motion and something new for the ear to grab onto. So that's just the harp setting from the BBC orchestra. And I've got that running through a bunch of delay, randomized delay. I just clicked magic dice until I landed somewhere I liked. Mix it down a little more than 50%. EQ'd again, a ton of the lows out, brought a bunch of the highs in. I just wanted this to be kind of a twinkly texture. A bunch of delay here on the baby come back with the ducker at 30 so that it's not like fighting too much as the actual notes play. Again, lows and highs. That's the flavor of the day. We got a RC20 here, just kind of shaped the sound a little bit, didn't do anything crazy, just a little bit of wobble, some distortion, reverb, and that magnetic feature, give it a little bit of that kind of lo-fi feel. And then one more go, taking those lows out. And I took 2 peaks out here because they were just a little bit harsh. So that by itself is just a really subtle texture that I'm imagining a collaborator, or in this case, the beat battlers, can choose to really bring it out or kind of keep it hidden in the back or just take it out of the beat altogether. So this sounds like this by itself. And that just adds this extra bit of motion in what's otherwise a pretty empty like piano and drone melody at the moment. So you'll notice that like all of my MIDI elements and the chords and the driving parts of it that aren't necessarily melodic are very simple, they're very sparse, and they're very minimal. And that is tip number 2, and it's just to leave plenty of space. So that can feel like it's in contradiction to tip number 1, right? You want to establish a clear direction, don't leave it too ambiguous, but you also need to leave plenty of space. The intention of this sample is to have someone join you on this track, so it shouldn't be a complete track with melodies, counter melodies, a full pad, all reverbed out, mixed with sidechain and drums. Like, that's just a song. You're just making a song and sending it to someone to put their name on. No shame if you want to do it that way, but that's not a true collaboration, and someone might not be as excited to try to add their flair, and it can be kind of hard to hop on a track that already feels complete. So you want to go with the simplest thing that feels like it's heading somewhere, if that makes sense. So that was sort of my approach as far as like the MIDI elements in this first section. And then the guitar is basically just adding that one kind of melodic layer that really anchors it and makes it feel like it's going to be a complete track. And all I'm doing there is just kind of like an arpeggio as I climb up some chords here. Have no idea what notes I played. I just kind of messed around until something sounded good. But once again, that all comes together sounding like this. So it's easy for me to imagine that as I pass this on to someone else, that they'll have plenty of opportunities to introduce certain elements at certain points in the arrangement phase. They'll be able to find melodies that can fit with these melodies or remove the melodies that aren't quite fitting with the melodies they want to add. And there's a lot of flexibility, but there's also not like so much going on that it feels like it's absolutely done, right? So tip number 2, leave plenty of space while still establishing a clear direction. So you'll notice I haven't broken down the whole second half of the loop yet, and that's because tip number 3 is to offer variety, right? Like I said, if you're making this specifically for a collaboration and you're the person providing the sample to start things off with, more likely than not, your collaborator is going to be the one building it out into an arrangement. And if all I sent them was these first 8 bars, yes, it's nice, yes, there's layers, there's opportunities for variety, but without them coming up with some significantly different B section that meshes really well with this. Maybe I didn't remember to send the MIDI, or maybe they're, can't quite get the tone match quite right on the piano part or something. It's really hard for them to come up with a track that doesn't feel super repetitive. So by including a B section that already fits with the A section that I made already, it's a very clear opportunity to say, okay, you have section A that you can use intro, verse 1, maybe you want B to be the bridge, or B is verse 1, and then you go back to A for the bridge. Now you've got things that you can chop and start putting in places, and you've already got a more interesting track going. So the way that I added variety in this one, I actually made this sample kind of backwards, right? So this keys 2 part is once again just kind of on the Labs soft piano. Shout out to my favorite piano on the planet. And the way that I started the sample off was just by playing this part into the MIDI. So I just kind of recorded the MIDI, played around until I found something I liked, and then I played it to the click track and ended up with this chord progression, which I then simplified and sort of reimagined to a new simplified rhythm that I could use in the first section. So this is what I started the sample off as, and I thought maybe this makes more sense in the second half. So that just plays 2 times. And you could be wondering, like, why not just, you know, use this the whole time with the same chords? And that goes back to tip number 2, right? Like, this is a lot of motion. There's a lot of, you know, sonic material going on. I've had 2 hands playing, and it felt, you know, very busy and very full. And on top of that, it felt very repetitive after 16 bars. So I knew that I wanted something to break that up in an actual track. If I'm sick of it after 16 bars, how am I gonna want it for 2.5 full minutes? So immediately my ears like, let's make sure that there's something else to play with here in this toolbox. So I dragged those MIDI notes over, simplified them, and came with something completely unique that still feels cohesive because it's obviously the same key, a lot of the same notes, same instruments, but they're just doing slightly different things. In sort of like contrast to the fact that they're the same exact chords and same exact instruments, the guitar has a really big departure from what it was doing before. So where before we had this kind of like ascending and descending arpeggio, I let this guitar be much more of a lead element where it feels like a, you know, star of the show kind of voice. And I knew that I wanted this because in an arrangement situation, having a melody to build off and around is a lot easier than having to come up with one de novo without any kind of like real direction or knowing what your anchor point's gonna be. So this is something that, even if they don't end up using it in the final track, can at least inspire a melodic direction that they can take the song in. All that comes together and gives us a section A and a section B that flow together pretty nicely like this. And one more piece of variety comes up here, the guitar changes. So like I said, that extra piece of variety where the guitar is different in the second repeat through the same chord progression, that's giving us more opportunity to build a bigger section, right? If we had a 4-bar loop that repeats, you know, twice for this B section, that's immediately harder to build a track around. So build some variance right into the part. And then one other thing I want to mention is that knowing again that I'm planning to send this as, in this case, a beat battle, but very same thought for a collaboration, is you want to be sure that it's easy to sort of loop the sections from audio. So if we take a peek down here at the bottom and just kind of see like what the waveforms are up to, I left, you know, one measure so that the reverbs could ring out. We didn't have any clicks or pops as they cut out. But if we were to take any one of these and, you know, let's say drag the guitar over, it doesn't look like it's going to be too much of an issue to have these things loop into one another, right? So you leave the reverb tail so that it's, you know, natural and it's got the same sound without them needing to find a new reverb on your dry signal. But then you've got it, you know, synced up and played nicely so that if they did want to repeat this longer than you had it in the original sample, it's very easy to do so. So all this is really just to illustrate the point that like it doesn't make a ton of sense to have a super over mixed element that's got, you know, like crazy reverb and delay and a big long tail that's sidechained to a kick that you ended up taking out before you sent it. So now there's this like pulsating waveform that runs on way longer than the measure is supposed to. Make sure it's kind of purpose built to be something that people can work with and loop it without too much work. I mean, obviously, like, don't sacrifice the quality of the sound or the style that you're going for, just to make it, you know, super easy to chop up. But having stems that are easy to work with is another thing that's going to make someone more likely to want to work with you again. So real quick before I wrap this thing up, I did mention earlier that there is still time to participate in the beat battle that's going on right now. It's super exciting because we are actually partnering up with my good friends over at Everdream Records. Big shout out to Kazi for agreeing to do this, where essentially the winner of this beat battle is going to be able to release their track as a collaboration with me on Everdream Records with the full support of the label. And he was even generous enough to offer that if we like more than one submission, we can put together a small compilation or a little beat tape. So plenty of reason to go get involved. There's a lot of opportunities to win, and who knows, we might be able to collaborate on whatever you do with this sample. So if you like the sample and you want to flip yourself and you want to have a chance to collaborate with me, definitely pop in the Discord. It's linked at the top of the description, and I cannot wait to hear what you guys cook up. Anyway, we'll see you next week. Peace.